So I'm from the MIT Kerberos Consortium. I'd like to thank Kathy, Christoph, Sun Microsystems, and a whole bunch of folks for inviting me down here today.
Yeah, and we're very proud to have you. So this is Thomas Harjono, and hopefully I pronounced it more or less right, from the MIT Consortium. And he's giving a presentation of Kerberos Authentication for web security. So,
thank you. Just a quick hands up. How many people know how Kerberos works? Okay, everybody does. So there's the front third of this is just intros about the consortium and how Kerberos works. So I'm going to just skip through that. And I won't talk about the history of Kerberos or show that slide, but I'll talk briefly about the consortium. The consortium was created about 18 months ago at MIT. It's a joint sort of deal between MIT, so it's MIT funded, and also funded by a number of organizations, vendors, sponsors, and so on. And it's got a number of goals. It wants to provide technical and thought leadership to the community. We've got this ambitious goal of making Kerberos a universal authentication protocol, not the universal authentication protocol. We can never be that, and we don't want to be that. But as you know, Kerberos is pretty much prevalent in a lot of environments. So historically, the development of the MIT code base has been sort of pretty loosely managed. So for example, before the consortium was created, the sort of average release time for updates to Kerberos was 2 years to 3 years, and we thought the VPs at MIT said we really need to put process in there, and so our current release time today is about 6 to 9 months. So there's a list of 1.7 and 1.8 features that I'll go through briefly later on. We want to take a look at how Kerberos could work in new environments, which is what my talk is really about. And help developers, because before the consortium, was created, if you look at the mailing list, there's a lot of new developers coming online saying how do I do X, Y, Z, right? And really we thought, gee, that's we really need some documentation. So in fact, the first year of the consortium, I think we ended up producing 400 to 500 pages of just documentation. I mean, it's boring stuff. Okay, developers don't like writing documentation, as we all know, but it had to be done, and it's sort of behind us now, and you could look at it on the kerberos.org website if you're interested. Just some of the members of the consortium. I'd like to thank Sun Microsystems. I mean, Sun has been a tremendous supporter of the consortium. One or two of the guys call into our weekly meeting, which is excellent. There's always a lot of things to talk about. So we're very happy with the support from Sun. And by showing this slide, I invite you folks to also join the consortium, or at least consider being a sponsor of the consortium, if you have an interest in seeing features that you need in the MIT code base, or you think that you need more interoperability with Active Directory and a few other things. So this is release 1.7 list of features. It's not all of it. It's just some of it. That was released in June 2009 this year. I'm not going to go through it. There's a wiki page on there's a projects wiki page on kerberos.org which will explain to you what each of these mean and what we've actually done with respect to the features. This is a list of the 1.8 planned features for 2010. There's a few interesting things there. Crypto modularity. This is simply the ability to take out the native crypto library inside the MIT code base and putting in your own, which hopefully was FIPS 140 compliant. This, in fact, came from a bunch of sponsors who said, man, wouldn't it be great if I could just use my own crypto library that's already been FIPS approved and proceed from there. And so we heard that and took action and put that on our planned features for 2010. But anyway, more of this is on the wiki page, and these slides are already up on the website. So you can catch me later if you want to ask any particular question about any of these features. So Kerberos today, So there is a large presence of Kerberos in the enterprise space today. Without a doubt, you go and look at any Gartner report, and you'll say, upwards of 60% of medium to large enterprises deploy AD. There's an interesting development of what I call AD clones, Red Hats, free IPNs. Those folks who want to integrate their own sort of stack with an AD environment. There's the MIT code-based deployment. We've got customers in the financial sector that run both huge AD, infrastructure, and at the same time, incredible deployment, of our code base. And, pretty interesting scenario. Sun, of course, I believe, ships the MIT code base. And also, Intel AMT, few people know, and it's not public information. If you look at any of the IDF slides, Intel Developer Conference slides for the last 3 years, AMT is the active management technology that allows remote management of firmware and hardware features on an Intel vPro platform without any OS present. So the authentication method that they're using there is Kerberos. They have a Kerberos service. They have a Kerberized management server running on every laptop, on every machine. Basically on any, if you see the vPro, well, this one here is an Intel Centrino one, but if you see one that has a vPro 2 logo on it, it's got Kerberos running there in firmware. So in these enterprises, there's been this question. This Kerberos on the web question came up because one of our sponsors said, so why don't you have Kerberos on the web, right? You tell me it's everywhere, and it is everywhere. And the answer is that inside environments that are homogeneous, like something like a Windows infrastructure, enterprises do actually use, SP2Go and basically Kerberos for single sign-on. Right? That's, intra-enterprise is sort of, I don't say it's an easy problem, but it's a bounded problem because you have control over, all your employees, all the people in the organization. It's much harder to get a solution for Kerberos on the web in the outside. So we talked about, mom and pop connecting to your, banking, website. So why is it that we're still using, the 4-digit PIN, and why does Bank of America use SiteKey, and why not just use Kerberos? So those are interesting questions. In the B2C and B2E environments, it's still, again, the same forms over SSL, passwords and forms, over SSL, and often without any endpoint, certificates anyway. So in certain, what we've seen is that in certain environments, again, intra-enterprise, HTTP Negotiated is used not just inside, but also to connect to affiliated organizations. But then, affiliated organizations, they have a pretty strong relationship, business relationship, legal relationship. So that can fly, that can work. But again, it's not equivalent to using Kerberos for the open internet. So the business to consumer web single sign-on is a harder problem. I presume people know what I mean when I say web single sign-on and web services, right? I mean, I don't have to define that one. It's a harder problem. What we're seeing is that there's a lot of interest in identity management and identity federation. You saw Bill's slides today. He mentioned OpenID, OpenAuth, and Bill mentioned, well, who is it out there that's going to be the identity provider, right? This is really his question. And there's indications that people like PayPal are interested in that space. A couple of weeks back, I was in DC for meeting and presentation. There was a guy from Equifax, the guys that do your credit score. Yeah, they're very interested in being an identity provider, and they're well suited because they have all your data. They know where you live, they know your social security number, they know, they know your mortgage, they know a lot of things. But anyway, so so there is that push and interest in stronger authentication in the market today, but it's an auxiliary to this bigger problem of, hey, we need identity and identity federation. And of course, when you start delving into that problem, there's this security privacy issue. How strong is your authentication? Is username password over SSL good enough, or should we use look at something stronger like Kerberos, which is where we come in. I'm not going to I presume everybody knows how HTTP Negotiate works. So it's also, you can look at the RFC numbers at the bottom there. But essentially, what happens is that when a client connects to a web server, the client is forced to get a service ticket. So the client goes off. So this is step 3 and 4. The client goes off to the KDC and says, hey, give me a service ticket to talk to that Kerberos server. And then he retries again, client retries again. So this works great within, I think, within the corporate boundary, or at least where the client can get access to the KDC easily. If the client is outside and the KDC is inside, there's no guarantee. If the client is outside and the KDC, let's say, the KDC was a cloud service, right? That's uncharted territory. I don't know if that's going to work. So I'm really saying is Spenego works well inside enterprise boundaries, but in the open internet, it's an unproven technology. And there's some technical issues with it, limitations that I'll talk about later on. Kerberos and identity management. In the SAML-based systems, Kerberos has been sort of, well, largely absent or overlooked. And I think it's primarily because, again, correct me, I think there was just no one, when SAML was being in Liberty specs were being pushed into a merge into SAML 2.0, there was really nobody there to champion the cause of Kerberos. There was just, well, you see the PKI or passwords sort of thing. Now in the AWS security stack is somewhat different. The folks who wrote the AWS security stack has placed at least there is a spec there, the Kerberos token profile, that allows a client to send to a web service an AP request message which contains a service ticket and an authenticator. So that works. They have a very well-defined need for that, and it's interesting that the authors only sort of addressed that message, the AP rec. They never thought of, or maybe they didn't think it was necessary to allow all 6 messages, all 6 flows in the Kerberos to actually run over, SOAP, over WS, over SOAP, right? They're just focused on this one last message, which is AP rec. And if you look at the architecture, it sort of makes sense. I can see why they do that. In the WS security space, of course, the stack is, the token profile is implemented in the card space, info card, implementation by Microsoft. I presume people here know about card space in Geneva and the Geneva STS. If not, you'll be hearing a lot more of it in the next couple of years. So identity providers. So today there's really no large. Well, I was going to say there's no real large scale identity service providers out there, but actually there is. I think Facebook is pretty much an identity provider. PayPal is pretty much an identity provider. When you want to pay something, you always have to, using PayPal, you always get bounced to the PayPal page, and you're authenticating using password. They are actually an identity provider in the SAML sense, in the Liberty sense. So trying to deploy Kerberos in the open internet is also an unproven case, because many of these providers, I mean the guys who run Facebook and PayPal, they don't use Kerberos. They have not yet, never used Kerberos. So they don't have, Kerberos deployment experience. So it's sort of ironic. You've got, enterprise guys, people in the enterprises, knowing Kerberos backwards, knowing all the Microsoft extensions backwards, and you have in the provider space, like, no interest. Username, passwords over SSL is good enough for us. So works in progress. So what are we doing about this in the consortium? So Kerberos and the web was one of the strategic pillars that the board of the consortium decided that the consortium members should work on. This is about a year ago. And that was actually, it stemmed out of a request from a couple of the big financial guys in downtown New York. This was the Goldman Sachs and, in fact, Morgan Stanley, who said, well, why don't you work on this problem? Because we think this, what they want to do is be able to extend out or duplicate their enterprise Kerberos-based authentication for their customers, right? So if you think about it, you can do intra-enterprise, you can do SPNego and web single sign-on easily, right? Using, say, an AD infrastructure in your enterprise. So how come you cannot copy the whole thing or partition off your infrastructure so that it can actually help and service mom and dad at home. I mean, if mom and dad at home are using, Windows 2000 at least, it's got Kerberos support there, right? And that's a, and I believe, same with the other client operating systems like, like Apple and Mac OS. So anyway, the work's in progress. What we're trying to do is actually update, or I don't say update the SAML specs, but actually create new SAML specs that would allow web single sign-on web services using Kerberos as the authentication method. And this is work done with Josh Howlett, who's actually a guy in the UK working for UUNet. So we have a Kerberos Web SSO draft in Oasis right now that we're sort of fixing up, maturing. And part of the problem is that if you go to an IDP that's running, OpenID or running Liberty's, SAML stacks or Shibboleth, and you say, hey, why don't you bolt on a Kerberos KDC behind your IDP server? They'll give you dirty looks, and no freaking way, right? So it's too hard, and it's probably our problem at the MIT Consortium that we really need to provide glue code so that this solution would work. And so the easiest first step is to actually assume that the IDP server, in fact, is a Kerberos service principal, so that the client really just needs to get a service ticket for that IDP from the KDC and say, hey, the KDC says I am who I am, here's my service ticket, you are a Kerberos service, Mr. IDP, here's my service ticket. And then the IDP can open up the, APREC message, open up, Authenticator, open up the service ticket and say, yeah, this is Thomas. And then the IDP will turn around and produce some signed SAML assertions saying, hey, if this client presents this assertion with this Kerberos client, name and these attributes, this is the right guy. So the client can then take that signed SAML assertions and turn around and give it to a service provider like a merchant downstream and say, hey, your IDP partner Equifax has just given me this assertion, and if you don't believe him, there's a copy of the APREC message base encoded wrapped at the bottom of my SAML assertion, just in case you're capable of opening up and parsing through and verifying the service ticket, but here it is. So that's the model that we're following, because it's sort of the path of least resistance. For an IDP, they don't have to run an entire, KDC. They just have to be a Kerberos service and sort of understand, how to open up a service ticket. And we plan to be, prototyping this maybe sometime early next year and provide the code to the community so that people can try it out. I mean, this is part of the mission of the consortium. A second more difficult problem is a Kerberos web service. So when you have a machine-to-machine situation, how can I allow a server to speak on my behalf to get a service ticket to access some other service, right? And I've got some ideas there, and we're looking for ideas. If you guys know solutions, we'd love to talk to you. So this is just a simple picture of what I was talking about earlier. Basically in step 0, that's not shown here, the client actually queried the service provider saying, hey, Mr. Merchant, I would like to do a transaction, I would like to authenticate. He gets bounced off saying, well, talk to this IDP, which is my IDP, and the IDP says, well, I don't know who you are, go and get a service ticket. So that's where step 1 starts, gets a service ticket, and then the client in step 3 and 4 provides that service ticket back to the authentication authority in the IDP, and then the IDP in turn in step 4 will give you a bunch of SAML assertions, and then the client can go back and try and reconnect to the merchant in step 5. Okay, so this is what I was talking about earlier about web service. So here's the scenario. Maybe this is too hard or too simple. You can tell me. So I'm traveling. I don't have access to my KDC from the outside. I'm somewhere in Europe. In fact, even worse, I may be on a kiosk. I would like to get access to my IMAP server back home inside my enterprise. So how do I do that? So one of the things we're looking at is one of the things we're looking at is to use some of the Microsoft extensions, which we have actually implemented also in the MIT code base, to implement the S4U to self and S4U to proxy, which is the constraint delegation. Presume people know about constraint delegation. So in that model, what happens is that I would tell the IDP, hey, IDP, get a service, get a TGT ticket with my name on it, and I give you authorization to speak on my behalf. And then the IDP is going to go off and say, and the protocol to use there is the S4U to self. Once the IDP does that, the IDP then tries to connect to the IMAP, and the IMAP says, I don't know who you are. So he says, well, in that case, I have to get another ticket that authorizes me to access the IMAP server, and the IDP will use the S4U to proxy extension to do that. So this is still rough. There's some ideas. I put this slide here, even though I know it's going to be probably confusing for those folks who never heard of S4U to self and proxy, but just a thought. And we like suggestions, inputs. If you know how to solve this problem, let us know. And that's basically a diagram, and maybe I should have shown that diagram. So the slides are up on the website. So I'm going to continue on because I think I've got like 5 minutes. So other related work, HTTP Negotiated, Espinego. So there's some issues there. There's lack of protection of the HTTP request. One of the problems with Negotiate is that it needs to be able to support multi-round trips. Of the GSS API mechanism. In this case, it's Kerberos. And the more difficult one is state management and endpoints. At the moment, there is no way to do that, right? And there's a couple of drafts in the ITF now. One suggestion is to do state management as a HTTP layer. Another one is actually to do the state management inside GSS API, so that when you reconnect, it knows about you. And if you're interested in the drafts, it's not my drafts, it's somebody else's, but I can point you to them on the ITF website. Other related work, so apparently for years there's been desire for Kerberos support inside TLS, so we're going to look into that problem. If you have an interest, in this work, please let me know. I'm trying to gather, enough people and a sufficient case to argue to the TLS working group that this is something worth looking at, because there's a big constituency out there of people who want it. So future work at the MIT KC along these lines of web services federation systems. We're gonna look there. We're trying to study the OASIS WS federation architecture to see how Kerberos could fit in. And also, there's been interesting suggestions saying, well, if you've got Kerberos running already, why not use it to secure all the SAML entities and all the SAML infrastructure pieces? So yeah, okay, that sort of makes sense. So we want to look into that. And for those who have more interest in this, you can look at our white paper. This white paper was produced earlier this year. We basically hired 4 independent consultants, to write this, and they're very knowledgeable in the SAML and in the WS space. So it's actually a very good. It's what, like 50, 60 pages long, but it's worth the read. From our side, it was worth the money. It was worth every penny, because it sort of summarized what the industry looked like and recommended a number of directions that the consortium should take Kerberos on the web. Okay. How many minutes? Go ahead, sir.
From an adoption standpoint, how far along have you guys been, or companies or even the government has been interested in doing this and actually adopting it?
In adopting Kerberos?
Yes.
So there's the web single sign-on problem, and there's the what authentication protocol to use for web single sign-on. And if it's web single sign-on using Kerberos, it's very limited. I know the folks at MIT who are using the Shibboleth stack for identity management. They've played around with bringing Kerberos. And to be frank, I think they found it easier to use the MIT issue certs, compared to Kerberos, and largely because they want to use SAML, right? All this traffic going back and forth is sort of SAML based. There is no Kerberos structure to there is no SAML structure to carry either an equivalent Kerberos information or carry a copy of the service ticket. Just there isn't one. So that's why we said let's do the basics. But in terms of Kerberos for web single sign-on, it's pretty much zero at this stage. Did I go too fast? No. Any more questions? Boy. Oh, there you go. Sorry, go ahead. Let's start from this side.
So you mentioned that in order to have the Kerberos service ticket issued, that you were working on a way of having the transport not be over the traditional stateful Kerberos interaction. Is that because you're trying to route it over the standard proxy servers that exist?
Right. So one of the problems is that if the client is outside and it's trying to get a service ticket, and the KDC is inside the corporate boundary, it's got all these connection issues going through firewalls and so on. There is no guarantee, and it seems maybe it's just to myself, but also several people have mentioned, HTTP is now the new routing layer, right? For those who go to the ITF from 15 years ago, the IP layer used to be the IP layer, the layer, transport, right? Maybe TCP. But today, for the young generation of people who don't know C and they just program in scripts, HTTP is the IP layer, right? And so we're saying, well, okay, so why can't we route all these 6 messages over HTTP? And how do you do that? SAML, right? There's one. WS over SOAP over, that's another way, right? But open to suggestions if you know, or some people say this base encode the whole thing and just push it over HTTP, right? But we need more attributes to go along with that connection so that the other side knows that, yeah, this is actually a message that has some Kerberos blobs inside, and you need additional processing, right? Give it the back end if you had a KDC, or call some other routine, or push it down to the GSS API, SSPI layer. Sorry, what? Oh, Darren, go on.
So on the Kerberos to kickstart TLS, what do you think the use cases are for this? This is something I looked at 5 or so years ago, and I thought it was a good idea at the time. But I actually think the world has changed so much that because we've got so much stuff sitting on the edge of your corporate boundary and stuff now, that it's almost that we'd want to tip it up the other way. You almost want to get it, because you don't really want to put a KDC right on the edge.
Yeah.
Although I actually think that is reasonable, but it scares people too much.
Yeah.
So while I think technically I think it's very interesting, I can't work out what the use case for it is anymore. I had one 5 years ago. I don't anymore.
Right. So that's a very good question. The strong request that we got to look at this actually came from some internal requirements in one of the big financial folks, right? And to be fair, I'm almost tempted to say that's a very unique requirement, right? And as you say, I've looked at this. So how can you do a bunch of Kerberos-based exchanges within a TLS handshake? Just that basic question. Does it make sense? Are you going to introduce some loopholes? I mean, TLS is now plumbing, right? Are you going to put another pipe inside the pipe, right? And how's that going to, So that's why we're still sort of investigating this problem and asking people, we'd like to hear from you guys. I mean, does this make sense? Is this something that the consortium should push? Or should we spend resources in things like SAML and WS where really there is a demand like from the identity space? I mean, identity is hot, just FYI for those, if the government uses OpenID, okay, and one day, that becomes the default protocol solution for you to access all your health records, tax records. I mean, God save us, right? Now, for those who don't know OpenID, they have some security issues, but I think if you look at the matching OAuth, again, they're pretty much using username password over SSL like everybody else. So I mean, we're neutral to any identity stack. We just want to push Kerberos. I hope that helps, Darren. We can take this offline. By the way, this TLS and Kerb thing has been a very contentious. So I've learned it's a very contentious issue in the ITF, right? And Darren's nodding because I think you've been there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks.